Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews and Shebrews, welcome to the Life Podcast. Today we're talking to Sarah Williams all about Kaleb House, which is a organization that rescues and then cares for and rehabilitates kids who have been sex trafficked. And we're going to talk to her also about her publishing company called Debarim Publishing. We're going to talk to her about the books that she's written and the books that she's edited that are all by Torah Observant authors. And we're going to talk to her about a marketplace that she created called Kahila, where it's kind of like an Etsy for Torah observers. Hers is a story of overcoming difficulties and trauma of her own to help tons of people now live their dreams in many ways or heal. Thank you guys for liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it. It means a ton to me and to the algorithm. This episode of the Life Podcast is sponsored by Shepherd's Crook Coffee. If you go to shepherdscrookcoffee.com, you'll get 25% off your first order with code THELIFE. You may not know this because I haven't shared it on the podcast, but I'm really into coffee. Here in rural Ohio, I'm very limited on finding organic dark roast coffee beans. And so at Kroger's, my options are pre-ground Pete's dark roast and Death Wish whole bean, but the beans are all crumbled up, and there's an evil skull on the front of the bag, and it's $20 a bag. My mom won't buy Death Wish coffee because of the skull. Shepherd's Crook Coffee is a Torah Observant coffee roasting small business that only buys organic beans. Some of the beans they buy are not certified organic, but owners Greg and Laura make sure that the growers are following organic processes, whether they're too small to have the certification or not. Getting you the healthy beans that you want at $11.99 a bag. Plus, with the 25% off that you get with code THELIFE, it's $8.99 a bag, and it's glorious. Look at this coffee. Look at the crema on this thing. It's gorgeous. These are the options I see. One, support evil Starbucks with their evil pagan mermaid. Or you can support a Torah-run, family-owned business that will ship you fresh roasted beans directly to your door for pretty much the same price. $8.99 with this 25% off code. Make sure you get enough for your whole Shabbat group. Get the big bags, baby. Go to shepherdscrookcoffee.com. Put in code THELIFE for 25% off. Without further ado, I give you Sarah. Sarah, welcome to the Life Podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having me, Luke. I really appreciate being on.
Well, man, you've done so much and you're doing so much. It's hard to know where to start. And so that's why I have to default back to, let's start with who you are. We need to know, who are you? Tell us a little about yourself and your testimony of becoming a believer, I guess, and coming into Torah eventually, if you will.
So I actually did not grow up in church at all. Didn't go to church as a kid once. I was taught by my mother mostly that church was filled with hypocrites, and that's why we didn't go to church. But I should still have a relationship with the Father. And so my mom was very big into, you need to pray. If you have issues, you need to pray. You need to talk to him and everything else. So growing up, I had the relationship, but no foundation. So I didn't really know anything about the Bible outside of very basic, like Noah's Ark and stuff like that you find in a children's book. And so I go my entire childhood and pretty much all my teen years, actually, not really knowing much about the Father other than have a relationship with him. I was a very stereotypical goody two-shoes in school. My goal was always to get to college, and nothing was going to stop me. And so I did all the things, the extracurriculars, the captain of the track team, the ROTC. I worked a part-time job. I did all the things that would look great on a college resume. And I got into college. I got full ride scholarship. I was there. I was excited. And then I basically was like, I reached my goal. Now I have freedom. And my life just kind of started doing a 180. And so I went from being this goody two-shoes I'm going to college, I'm going to do everything right, to I have freedom, I'm going to party, I'm going to do all the things that I was never able to do in high school because I was trying to get into college. And so I still had like that relationship with a father. Like I still would pray to him from time to time, but I started walking away, and like walking away really fast. And so when I was 19 years old, actually, so 2 weeks after I turned 18, I went into college. I moved onto campus, lived in a co-ed dorm. When I was 19, I was actually sexually assaulted at a friend's birthday party. And that's actually what I had already started walking away from the father, but that's what really started sending me far, far away from the father. I tried to make everything about my control and what I could do and to keep things in my control. And I kind of looked at it as like the father, not that the father didn't protect me, because I had already started walking away some, but more so like, if I can control the situations, if I can be in charge of everything, then I will be safe, because I don't have this like person I can't see being in charge of my life. I'm in charge of my life. A few months after I was assaulted, my father actually got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. He had been a smoker his entire life. I'm talking multiple packs a day kind of smoker. And so seeing that growing up, that was one thing that both of my parents actually smoked, and they both instilled in me, do not smoke. It's a horrible addiction. Don't ever do it. And I never have. But when my dad, I still literally remember where I was at, what happened, that whole entire moment when I got the phone call from my mom that my dad had lung cancer. I think I just completely stopped talking to the father at that point. I had just been assaulted. Probably 4 months later, I find out about my father, and I was done. I was just mentally, emotionally done. I was a kid. I didn't know what the heck to do, and I lived on campus with a bunch of other kids that didn't know what the heck to do. And I keep going on in my life. I actually, about a year after I found out that my father was diagnosed with lung cancer, I meet my husband, who I'm married to now. And a month and a week after my father died, or after I met my husband, my father died. And so my father was from the time he was diagnosed to the time he passed away was 10 months. So my dad had 10 months left on this earth after he was diagnosed. And my husband, God bless him, because we had only known each other a month and a week. We'd been dating a month. My husband was like one of those people, when you meet him, you know, like that's who he is. Like, that's my husband. I knew it. there was no denying it. But my husband, we were just dating, and he literally held me while I watched my father take his last breath. Like, I crumbled to the ground, and my husband was holding me, as like coming to the ground with me as I'm crumbling. I'm the youngest of two. My sister's 8 years older than me. She was there. My mother was there. And it was just a very hard time in my life, because the assault had happened. My father diagnosed very quickly thereafter. My father's dead. And I full on went alcoholic. Like, there was no, I'm in college, so I drink. Like, I'm not an alcoholic because I'm in college. Like, that whole shtick. No, I was a full-on alcoholic by that point. And I had to do anything and everything I could do to numb the pain. I was very angry. I was kind of angry at my father too, because he did something that he knew could kill him, and he still continued to do it, even though, like, you know, there was my sister and myself, and my sister had 2 children when my father died and everything else, but that didn't prevent him from stopping that addiction. And just, honestly, it shows how strong addictions can be when you have all this love of a family and you still can't stop, and then it ends up killing you. And so I was very angry. I was an alcoholic, and he was my boyfriend at the time, but my husband, he dealt with me through all of that. He helped keep me stable-ish, prevented me from doing anything really stupid. I did plenty of stupid things, but he prevented me from doing really, really stupid things. But I kind of went down a very destructive path for a while. Throughout the remainder of college, I was in college for 2 more years. I remained an alcoholic, basically. I drank a lot and frequently. And it wasn't until I started getting close to graduation from college that I realized that I had to, I guess, grow up. I couldn't keep just drinking my pain away. And I didn't turn back to the Father. I talked to him occasionally, but I didn't really turn back to him at all. At the time, I claimed to be agnostic. And I knew I had to stop drinking, though, because I had to go into the workforce. I had to be professional. I had to get a job. I was working, the job I had at the time, I was actually supposed to get promoted once I graduated, but then that didn't happen. And so I ended up moving back to my hometown with my husband, who, ironically, I met my husband in college. Like I said, shortly before my dad died. My husband and I actually grew up in the same hometown, 15 minutes from each other our entire lives, and never met until 1 month before my dad dies. And so we moved back to our hometown, and I began working. And by that point already, my husband and I were engaged. Because of everything that had happened with my father, like I didn't grow up in money anyways. Like my dad was a heavy equipment mechanic, very blue collar kind of family. So once my dad passed away, we didn't really have much of anything. So when it came to wedding time, my husband and I were like, we're paying for it ourselves. So we saved money, we worked hard, we paid for our wedding completely. There was no debt, and we were really happy about that. There was definitely plenty of trials with my husband and I because neither of us really had the Father in our lives. My husband had grown up Methodist, and he'd gone to church every Sunday. His mom was Sunday school teacher kind of thing. But as he, like myself, became older, he kind of started walking away. And so when we met, and for several years after, we didn't even have the Father in our lives. But we get married at 23-ish, 24. I can't remember exactly timeline wise how old I was, but it was 23, 24 time period. And also at 24, shortly after we got married, we got pregnant and had our first daughter. And that was kind of a big catalyst in my life because I was still drinking even before our first daughter. I didn't drink when I was pregnant. I drank before I got pregnant with our first daughter. And it was still kind of to numb the pain. I didn't drink as heavily as I had before, but I still drank quite a bit. But once I got pregnant and then had our first daughter, again, it was one of those moments where I have to grow up. Yes, I'm a professional. I have my professional job, but now I have a child who relies on me. I have to be better than what I've been before. And that still didn't even actually bring me closer really to the Father. I was still angry. I was still trying to overcome like the frustration of my father passing away and everything like that. But in that time period of 24 to like 25 years old, in between having our first daughter and like next life steps, my husband and I, because of how we didn't have like that honeymoon period, we went from barely knowing each other to massive trauma. And so we had a lot, we were also both very young still at the time. We had a lot of growing up to do. And so up until about 25 years old, both him and I were really trying to figure out how to grow up, how to be better people for each other, how to not fight constantly, because we did a lot of that. And really just trying to figure out who we were and what we wanted to do in our lives. And again, it was a lot of like us. Like, what do we want to do when we grow up? What do we want to be when we grow up? There wasn't any of that reaching out to the Father. Around the time of 25 years old, though, things were pretty rough in my relationship with my husband. And we both just were very unhappy, fighting almost constantly. And I remember one time coming home from a work trip that I had been on, and I pull in the driveway. It's late at night, and I was done. I was so exhausted. I was so tired. I was tired of fighting. I loved my husband with all my heart, and I knew he loved me with all his heart. Despite all our fighting, we knew we loved each other immensely, but things just weren't working out. They weren't right, and neither of us were happy at all. And I remember pulling in the driveway that night, And I just got on my knees and I literally cried out to the Father, take control of my life. Please help me, fix me. I don't know what's even wrong with me, but I know I need to be fixed. I know I need to be a better person. And I literally laid basically face down in my driveway. And it was like, we lived out in the country, so it was just dirt. I laid face down literally in the dirt and just wept. And my husband was inside with our daughter, and I'm crying. I don't know what else to do. I knew I didn't have any idea of what the heck to do with my life or how to be a better person without him. And so I had that moment with the Father, and then I walk into the house and I talk to my husband. And kind of from that moment on, my husband and I didn't necessarily start living for the Father, but we started allowing him into our lives more and started trying to take those steps of, okay, we both love each other. We want to be better people. We were literally almost at divorce. Like, we had talked about divorcing. And it was one of those things that was just like, we can't keep doing this. Let's try to be better. And let's try to learn. Like, we literally wrote a list out for each other of all the things that we each did to hurt each other. So, like, I wrote a list of everything he did that hurts my feelings or makes me sad or whatever. And he did the same for me. Like, these are the things and we like compared lists. Or like, okay, how can we fix, like, this is what hurts you. I had no idea that I did that and it hurt you, and vice versa. So we literally just kind of laid it all out on the line of like, this is what we're doing wrong to each other. We need to try to fix it. And then there were some things that's like, oh man, that's a small thing that I do regularly that I didn't even realize I did. I'm so sorry. Like, I will watch that now. And so we had that kind of come together moment, even in all our anger and frustration. And I really honestly believe that was the Father starting the process of us working on ourselves, because before that, my husband and I were way too prideful to even try to admit that we were wrong. We're both the youngest children in our family, so we very much so had like the youngest mentality of liking to get our way. And so that caused a lot of the problems, honestly. But we just we came together and we had that moment. But we kept working on things. I really started growing in my relationship with the Father. My husband did too, but him and I are very different in how we operate with the Father. So we both kind of just focused on our own relationship with the Father, and neither of us took like a judging type atmosphere of, oh, you're not praying as much as I am, because I don't know, my husband could be out praying in a field and I don't know. So if I'm not seeing my husband on his knees, it doesn't mean my husband's not praying. And same for me, my husband with me. And so we just kind of started working on it ourselves together, but still ourselves, because we both knew that we were both so individually messed up that there was no way we were going to like teach each other anything in that moment in our lives. And shortly after that time period, where we started coming together more, my husband approached me because my husband's a researcher. He loves researching things. He will watch videos and read books for sometimes years before he actually makes a huge decision. And so that actually, shortly after we came together, he did that with me, because he had been for about a year up until that point researching regenerative agriculture and growing your own food. And he was starting his process and kind of getting back to the land and getting back to the Father's creation and how we were created to tend the earth and everything else. And it was interesting because the Father really, even through now the years that we've been doing this, the Father has used livestock and our animals and management of it and all the research my husband has done to really help pull my husband along and really gain a very strong relationship with the Father through animal husbandry. But my husband came to me, like I said, several years ago. I was like, I want to start raising sheep. I'm like, that's super cool. I know nothing about that. I had cats growing up. I had no idea how to raise sheep. We had cats. That was all I had. I had cats. He had dogs and 2 goats growing up, like pygmy goats. They were pets.
What was it? Did he
tell you what it was originally that made him start researching regenerative agriculture?
My husband's always like been interested in figuring out ways to live without necessarily needing other people. He's very, very independent minded, I guess. But his brother actually sent him a Joel Salatin YouTube video when we were about 24, 25 years old. My brother-in-law sent him a video, and that started my husband down that path. And my husband literally watched videos, read books for over a year before he actually made the decision to do it. And so one day, in January of 2014, my husband brings home 27 Florida cracker sheep. And we have been shepherding a flock ever since then.
Whoa.
Yeah. It just so happened to work out that there was a woman that lived not far from my in-laws who was trying to get rid of the remainder of her flock. At one point, the flock she had was over 300 sheep, but because they had no Livestock Guardian dogs and no electric fencing, the coyotes literally just decimated the flock. Because it was out in the country, coyotes could just come and go as they pleased on the property, and when we got them, there was literally 27 left of the original 300. And they had been kept in a cattle panel enclosure with just hay. They'd been thrown on top of hay, so they had horrible parasites. So we got them for super cheap, but we also lost a fair amount of sheep right in the beginning. I think within a month of having them, 5 or 6 died from parasites. And so it was a really, it was not an easy transition into farming. And then doing regenerative agriculture, we're doing paddock shifts regularly and we're doing all these things. And so it was very interesting to finally be coming back together, having a 1-year-old daughter, and now starting agriculture. It was a very interesting time, but it was good. And I can see how the Father was working on us, especially with like patience on on our property that we were on. But we got the sheep.
I do have a question about sheep. I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt the story, but some guy is going to bring me 4 sheep, and I've been putting up a fence. It's taken me forever because it's a big field. And I've been doing other things. But do you have some basic recommendations on taking care of sheep, if you don't mind a little distraction?
The easiest way to keep sheep parasite free, so in understanding, we've never wormed our sheep, we've never trimmed hooves, we've never had to, we've never helped a sheep give birth to anything. Our sheep are basically feral, but they do like us. So what we do is, like with the Joel Salatin method, is rotational grazing. And so say you have a 3 or 4 acre pasture. Well, you have that perimeter fence, which is fantastic. You should have a basic barbed wire or regular fencing, perimeter fencing. But you can also put electric fencing around the bottom. So it's just a single wire of electric fencing on the inside of your permanent fence that you have. So on the property we have now, it already had field fencing on it, the barbed wire fencing. And so we put 2 strands of electric fencing along the bottom of the perimeter, and that will keep coyotes, foxes, stray dogs out typically, because they'll try to push through the fence and they'll get shocked by that first round of electric fencing. So that keeps most animals off property, so you don't have to worry about predators as much. With your sheep, to keep them healthy, you can get, it's called Gallagher Smart Fences, and it's literally a 4-strand fence, 4 or 5. I can't think of it now. I think it's 4-strand fence that is on a reel system, and you just pull it out and you plant stakes. The stakes are all included, everything. It's a fence, a whole fence in one, and it has 330 feet of fencing on the system. And you can make paddocks out of it. You can make just like long sections on your fencing. You could do squares, whatever you wanted to do, whatever shape is necessary for your space. You do that, and the sheep will get trained very, very quickly to electric fencing. Like, they won't try to jump through it. They won't, because they can, I swear they can sense the electricity, because there are times we turn our fence off to move them, and they'll get super close to the fence and like sniff it. And then they're like, okay, it's off. So they'll stand really close waiting for us to move them to the next paddock. But the minute we turn that on, they back up. I don't know if they can sense the electricity or whatever, but our sheep are very well trained to their electric fencing. It takes some time, and you may have some that try to jump through the fencing. But after they get shocked enough, and it's the shock of like static electricity, it's not like a horrible electrical shock. I've been shocked plenty of times. My kids have been shocked. It's a thing with working with electric fencing. But if you get the Gallagher Smart Fences, that'll make moving your sheep really, really, really easy. I do not suggest electrical net fencing. We've done it. That's what we started with. It is super difficult to work with in tall grass, or if you have weeds of any kinds or thorny vines, it gets caught a lot. That's why I say the Gallagher Smart Fencing, because you can create paddocks, you can move them quickly, and it allows them to rotationally graze, because parasites can only live so long in a section of grass. So if you have your sheep in the same spot over and over and over again, the parasites, they're going to eat the grass further and further down. And parasites usually only live within the first couple inches of your grass. So if your grass is real tall and the sheep only eat off this much, they're not even reaching the parasites. But if you keep your sheep in the same spot and your grass is this tall and they've been there for a while, pooping all over their food basically, you can get parasites, and then the sheep are then eating where the parasites live.
Oh.
But if you're rotationally grazing, the parasites die off before you get back to where you were before. And so it keeps them a lot healthier. Like I said, we lost a lot in the beginning to parasites because they were kept in a very small cattle panel enclosure with hay just being thrown on top of hay on top of hay. Plus, with rotational grazing, that actually prevents them from eating all the really good grass, because there's certain grasses sheep like and certain grasses sheep don't like, and there's certain grasses that aren't that great for sheep because of their protein quality is not good, their sugar quality is not good, things like that. I know all this because of my husband. But if you do rotational grazing, you're allowing your grass to recover from the sheep eating it. And so what happens when you have sheep just thrown out in a pasture, they'll eat all the really good grass first, and then they'll eat the not so great grass. But then if the really good grasses start coming back, they'll go back to that really good grass. And what happens over time is all the grass they like the most ends up dying off because it gets overgrown by the not so great grass, because the sheep aren't eating that. And so over time, you basically get, the sheep will still eat it, they just won't like it, and it won't have as good of nutrient qualities either. So it keeps your sheep healthier by rotationally grazing them, and it keeps their the nutrients they get more readily available versus depleting them.
Do you move them every day?
No. So the paddocks that we have on our property, and my husband literally has our property set up to where it is a rectangle and they move in a circle around the property. So he has it where he just jumps them from we have no cross fencing, no nothing. It's all just moving them with electrical fencing. But he moves them depending on how tall the grass is and how big the paddock is, he'll move them typically every 3 to 4 days. Sometimes, like in the springtime when our grass is up to our waists, we're not moving them for a week or more. But even after a certain amount of time, if you think about it, the animals, as they walk through that area, they're going to the bathroom on it. And so even if the grass still looks great, they don't want to eat it because they've gone to the bathroom on it. So they will stop eating the grass and lose body condition in a sense because they don't want to eat stuff that tastes bad.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Because now you have 50 sheep.
Yes. Yeah. We started with 27. We've lost, to be completely honest, we've lost hundreds of sheep over the years because we breed specifically for the sheep to be able to be fully functioning without any intervention from us whatsoever. And so our sheep, we've never done deworming or trimming hoofs or helping them give birth or anything like that, because those are the sheep that have basically survived over the years. So we have some sheep now that are 6 or 7 years old, and we've had several reiterations of this, of 6 to 7 year old sheep, but some sheep that are 6 to 7 years old that we've literally never done anything for them. And they're now producing babies that we don't have to do anything for other than move them and obviously give them water.
Oh, sorry. Do they have like 2 to 3 babies a year? Like, do they do the two times a year of like sheeping or lambing or?
So sometimes, so when we were in Florida, because that's where we're originally from, when we were in Florida, the sheep would have 2 lamb crops a year, typically. Now, Florida cracker sheep, very rarely, that's the breed we started with, Florida cracker sheep very rarely have twins, because the Florida cracker sheep actually came over on the ship with the Spanish explorers. Like, our flock has lineage almost back to that time that they've been able to trace. And so Florida cracker sheep have their wool sheep, but they have no wool on their bellies, legs, or faces so that they stay cooler in Florida summers. Because they're also naturally a smaller breed, again, for being able to get away from predators and the environment and everything else, they usually only have 1 lamb at a time. Now, if you have hair sheep like St. Croix or Katahdin, they can do double, like twins, and sometimes triplets at a time. Triplets is pretty rare, but we have, over the years, brought in Katahdins into our flock because we are starting to try to move towards all hair sheep. We're tired of shearing sheep. So we've brought in Katahdins, and they many times will now have twins. And so when we moved to Oklahoma, we split the flock with my father-in-law because my father-in-law and my husband originally went in on the original flock. And so when we moved from Florida to Oklahoma, we split the flock. So we came to Oklahoma in 2021 with 14 sheep. Our first lamb crop, we actually lost all but one of them because they had been bred for Florida weather. They had not been bred in time with Oklahoma weather. And so all the babies were born when it was super duper cold. And because we had shelters and stuff like that, but we were also living completely off grid, like no power whatsoever, all this stuff, like the sheep unfortunately died. And we kind of expected that when we moved here, because also our ewes were not used to Oklahoma weather either. And so that first lamb crop was basically a total loss. But it was so cool because since that first lamb crop, we have had almost every ewe have twins, and even Florida crackers. Like, we had a cracker that's never had twins have twins this year. And now we're having our Katahdins are dropping twins, and so there are sometimes still singles in there. But the amount of twins we've had with sheep that have never had twins before until moving onto this property has been astounding. And it's been so honestly beautiful to see the father work, because when we moved to Oklahoma, we'd been doing regenerative agriculture for 8 years and we had lost so many sheep. And we literally get to this property and all of a sudden it's just this explosion of life. And all we did was change locations. Like, we didn't change our practices. We didn't change our methods. We didn't change anything. They're still on pasture. Like, we just changed locations.
Whoa.
And our sheep got in the cycle of, they're used to Oklahoma weather now. So like our ewes, they cycle according to the weather patterns. And they also don't cycle until they're healthy, of course, too. But like, we will get anywhere, sometimes 2 lamb crops in a year, depending on how quickly the ewes bounce back with their health. And then sometimes it's, in 1.5 years, we'll get 2 lamb crops. But in Florida, we were getting 2 lamb crops a year without fail, but it also like never gets cold in Florida. But now we get 1 to 2 in a year to year and a half.
And last sheep question. Sorry, some of the viewers who don't care about sheep will have to skip this part. But
you're good.
Do you have dogs now? And did you always have dogs? And if so, what kind?
Yes, so we have had Livestock Guardian dogs. We did not have Livestock Guardian dogs initially when we got the sheep. We probably got them about a year or so, I want to say, after we got them. But we initially had 2 full Great Pyrenees males. They were brothers named Samson and Titus, and they were fantastic, like incredible dogs. And we had them and we brought them here to Oklahoma with us, and they were getting older by that point typically Great Pyrenees, like 10 and a half to 12 years is kind of their life cycle. And so when we moved to Oklahoma, they were kind of already getting a little old. They were 8.5-ish years old. And so we knew we were going to have to bring more LGDs on property. And it actually, again, the father and how he works, one night we hear our dogs going ballistic, and we're in the middle of nowhere. We have a very large property, and everybody around us has very large properties, and we hear our dogs going ballistic, and we think, oh my goodness, there's a coyote or something on our property, because we hear another dog going, like screaming, a dog screaming, and something's getting killed, right? Well, we run out, and we see my husband looks in the brush pile near our camper, and he's like, it's a puppy. I'm like, what? A puppy? And in my head, I'm thinking, where the heck did this puppy come from? Because we're not even anywhere near a road currently. And it's this little tiny black puppy runs out and runs straight to me. And that night, I had been having a full-on meltdown of how the heck are we going to ever do anything in our lives? We sold everything we owned in Florida. We moved to middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. We're in a camper with all our kids. And I was just melting down about how we were going to do life. And all of a sudden, the father sends me this most adorable little tiny black puppy who happens to be a Livestock Guardian dog.
That's crazy.
So we find out weeks later, because we asked around and no one immediately said they were missing a dog. We find out weeks later that our neighbor was missing for a week or more, a puppy from his litter, but it was an Anatolian Shepherd, which is another kind of Livestock Guardian dog. And so he had an Anatolian Shepherd that had puppies, and those dogs just roamed, and that puppy had gotten separated and somehow ended up next to our camper at 3 o'clock in the morning on the day I'm having a meltdown. And so we named him Ezra. And Ezra was our first Oklahoma LGD. And since then, both our Florida LGDs have passed away due to old age. But now we have Ezra, Esther, Honey, Jasper, and Jupe. The other dogs are all Anatolian Great Pyrenees mix. So
Okay.
Great Pyrenees are fantastic dogs. They bark a lot. That's how they keep predators away. Anatolians are more of your attack type dogs. If something comes on property, they will kill it. And so that's why we kind of like the mix of Anatolian and Great Pyrenees, because one, they're also super fluffy usually if they're partially Great Pyrenees, so they're adorable. But you get the fluff and the bark of a Pyrenees, but you also get the aggressiveness of the Anatolian Shepherds, but they're not that way towards people. Unless that person is meaning to do you wrong, then the dogs will react. But for the most part, both Anatolians and Great Pyrenees, especially if you get them from the right farm, basically, they will be really, really good with people. My kids have legit pulled fur out of their faces as babies, pulled fur out of the dogs' faces, and the dogs are like, that was great, do it again. Like they don't care. They're fantastic with our kids. They've been great with our animals. And so it's definitely a good thing to have LGDs.
So you got to have that, or they'll die, probably. Okay.
Yeah, it helps keep the predators away too. Electric fencing is always a good deterrent, but we've still had dogs and stuff like that get through our electric fencing, and that's where our dogs have come into play, because I have been so proud of my dogs multiple times with chasing stray dogs off our property and keeping our flock safe.
That's amazing. Okay. All right. I'd like to ask you more, but I'll stop. Let's go back to your story where you were and get us to where you brought us, because you brought us. You're in Oklahoma now. You have a farm, but get us there, I guess.
Yeah. So when my father passed away when I was 20. And actually, when I was 27, my nephew passed away. And in the time of 25 to 27 years old, 25 is when I said to the father, this is it, take my life. Do what you need to do with me. In the time period of that happening, and then my nephew dying, I had come a lot closer to the father than I had ever been in my entire life. I had, same with my husband, too. We both had a very at the time, compared to before, a very deep relationship with the Father. We were praying. We were not going to church yet. We still weren't going to church, but we were putting the Father as a focus in our marriage and our lives. And it was shortly after our second daughter was born that I get a phone call from my sister. And this is when we still celebrated Christmas. So it was the day after Christmas. And my sister calls me and she said, Sarah, someone in my family has died. And in my sister's family is my sister, my brother-in-law, my nephew, and my niece. That's it. 4 people. And I knew it wasn't my sister because my sister called me. I was literally nursing our 4-month-old at the time. And my husband had just gone to my in-laws' house to visit with them for a little bit with our oldest daughter. So I called my husband, and I said to him, I was like, you have to get home. Someone in my sister's family has died. And so my husband leaves our oldest daughter there with his parents, comes back, gets the baby. We leave the baby with my in-laws. You know, we got the bottles for them and everything else. And we're driving to my sister's house, and I can vividly remember being in the car and just praying, please don't let it be my nephew. Please don't let it be my nephew. Please let it. And I'm like, Danny, Maddie, which are my brother-in-law and and my niece. I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, just, I don't want either. I don't want anybody to die. My nephew was born when I was 13 years old. He's basically was my little brother. He was the sweetest, most kind young man. He died when he was 14. Kind young man you would have ever met. When he passed away, he was 6 feet tall, 220 pounds. He was a linebacker. His goal was to go to USF like I did. He wanted to become a professional football player so that he could take care of his parents. And it's like he just had this heart of gold. And unfortunately, that's what failed him is he died from an undiagnosed heart condition that is incredibly rare that he was born with, and we never knew it. But I remember driving to my sister's house just praying, and I literally went through like the 7 stages of grief on the way to my sister's house. And at one point, I kind of had this like odd out-of-body experience in the sense that I was looking down, and I'm still in the car. My husband was going 85 miles an hour trying to get there. I'm still in the car, but I see myself like hovering above my sister's house. And I see my husband and I pull into my sister's house, and my husband parked in a really weird spot that we've never ever parked in before. And I see myself run out of the car and run to my mother, who wasn't even supposed to be at my sister's house yet. And I see myself run to my mom, and my mom say to me, Sarah, it's Dylan, which is my nephew. And I saw myself collapse to the ground and start screaming. And then I come back to, and I'm in the car still. And I just stopped, and I was like, oh my God, it's my nephew. And I just sat there and I was just like, oh. And I looked over at my husband. I'm like, it's Dylan. Dylan's the one who died. And he's like, still driving. He's like, okay, we'll see when we get there. And because my nephew and my husband were very close. And so we get to my sister's house, and everything I literally just told you happened exactly as it did. My husband, and I didn't tell my husband about the vision or anything like that. My husband literally parks in the really weird spot, and my mom was there even though she wasn't supposed to be because she lived further away than us. I don't even know how she got there before us. I ran to my mom. I'm in like my sister's front yard, and my mom tells me, and I literally drop to my knees in between my mom's feet and just scream like an unearthly, guttural scream. I didn't even scream like that when my dad died. I also had 10 months of knowing that my dad was dying to kind of work to that point. My nephew, I had literally just seen him the day before for Christmas. Like, I had hugged him and told him how much I loved him. And we'd all spent the time together as a family, and the next day I'm in my sister's front yard screaming because he's dead. But the minute I stood up, I was at peace. I was good. I was 100% okay. I was 100% at peace with my nephew being gone. And that is only by the grace of God, because I had said to my husband after my dad died, I can't handle anybody else in my family dying too soon, especially my nephew. 7 years prior, I had told my husband I can't lose my nephew. And it was that moment when my nephew died that I felt the peace of the Father. And I knew at that moment, even though I didn't necessarily have like a crazy super strong relationship with him, I knew he had me without a shadow of a doubt. and that every stupid thing that I had ever done in my life, because I'd done a lot of them, every stupid thing I'd done in my life prior to that moment when I was 29 years old, or 27 years old, that the Father had forgiven me and that he loved me and that he was holding me in that moment of losing the person outside of like my husband and my children that I was closest to. And so when I stood up in my sister's front yard, I was completely at peace. And my mom and my sister and my brother-in-law and my niece, rightly so, were all just completely devastated. And it was kind of a hard time in our family dynamic. One of the reasons I know the Father gave me the peace that I was supposed to have was so that I could be not a sounding board, but like a non-emotional, in a sense, person in that time period. Because like I gave the eulogy at my nephew's funeral. I helped set up my nephew's funeral for my sister. Like I picked the songs, I did the slideshow, all those things that my sister and brother-in-law, they're trying to pay for their 14-year-old's funeral. Like what parent thinks they're going to be doing that? And he was perfectly healthy. Like he looking back on it now, they realize he had symptoms of it, but it's like 0.01% of the population has the disease he has. And so I was able to do those things with the funeral and everything else. And of course I still cried because it still was sad, but I was okay with him being gone. And I've been okay ever since then. And it's been 8 years now that he's passed away. And it was an interesting dynamic though with my family, because my mom and my sister at the time didn't understand how I couldn't be more upset. And I was trying to explain to them, it's from the Father, he's given me this peace with it and everything else. So we kind of had a very tense dynamic because they thought I was being heartless and cold and unloving towards my nephew and towards them, when I didn't feel the need to cry sometimes. I still cry every now and then, like when it's close to his birthday and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, miss you, Dylan. But like, it's still, I was okay. And when that moment happened, that actually was probably one of the biggest shifts in faith for myself and for my family, because my oldest daughter, who was 4 years old at the time, or 3.5-ish, 4, she started asking me questions about the Father. Mommy, why did Dylan die? Where did Dylan go? Like this, that, and the other thing. All these questions she started asking me about the Father, and then things she would start saying. I was like, I don't even know where you know that from. Like about the Father and about God and everything else. She started saying all these questions, and I was just like, you are like 3.5. Like, how do you even know this stuff? And how are you asking me these questions? Because I'm 27 and never asked these questions before. And so she started asking all these questions, and I realized I don't have answers to any of this. And so did my husband. He's like, I don't have answers to it. And he grew up in the church. He's like, I don't have answers to this either. And so that's when we started actually really starting to kind of get into the Word more and trying to be better about our relationship with the Father in the sense of learning about him. It was still very slow. And I would kind of like look into the things that my daughter would ask me questions about, and that was basically the extent of me looking into the Bible. And we did start sending her when she was 4, though, to like child's Bible study with her cousins and my husband's mom. But we still were not going to church. It wasn't until I was 29 years old, and even with the assault, my father passing away, my nephew passing away, I had never felt like I'd hit rock bottom. When I was 29 years old, my husband and I were still renting. I was 2 months postpartum with our third daughter, and we find out our rental's in foreclosure. And we had been paying our rent every month on the 1st perfectly, and the landlord just had not been paying the mortgage.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, it was super fun. I actually found it on the county's foreclosure auction site for the courthouse.
So he didn't even tell you. You just discovered this.
Nope. We were never told. We found it out and basically approached them about it. And that is actually when I hit rock bottom, because I hated the landlord. Like I have been assaulted, people have died, all these other things. Like I have never hated anybody in my life. I hated the landlord because I have 3 children. One of them is 2 months old. We've been doing everything right. Like we had done everything right. We kept the property nice, the house nice, all the things. We'd done all the things, paid our rent perfectly on time, and just collapsed. And in that moment, it was July of 2019. When I saw it. It was July 2nd. By July 18th, I stepped foot in church for the first time. Like, that is what sent me to church, because I had grown enough in the Father knowing that I cannot hate someone, that I cannot have that unforgiveness in my heart, because that's not right. I have to forgive that person. And I knew that there was nothing that I could physically do to forgive that person without more knowledge of the Father and having him deeper in my life. And so that horrible moment is what actually led our family to go to church for the first time ever as a family, and for me to go to church for the first time ever, period. And, well, I'm sorry, I did go to church a couple times, like on Easter and Christmas, just because that's the right thing to do. But like, like actually wanting to go to church, that was the first time ever in my life that I actually wanted to go to church. And we went to church.
Sarah, this is so wild. I'm just noticing something in your life, that when bad or traumatic things happen, it has driven you away from the Father, and then driven you away, and then driven you closer, and then closer.
Yeah.
What is it? It's so crazy how we are as people, how something bad can either bring us closer to him and make us want to realize, oh, we can't solve this on our own, or it can drive us away. I guess it just depends on our time of life.
Yeah, at 29, I was definitely way more mature than I was at 19 and 20. I also had started having a bit of a foundation at that point with the Father and a relationship. And it was going to church. It was a very small church. There were 20 people in the church, and our family was 5 of them. I knew the pastor's daughter, and my husband had actually gone to school with her little brother. And so we knew the pastor and like the pastoral family. So that's why I decided, like, I was like, this is easy. If I go to this tiny little church, because my fear was I was going to be judged. I was 29 years old. I'd never really been in church for the actual, like, real reasons of you should be going to church, or anything like that. I was very insecure in my knowledge because I basically knew nothing. And so I felt more at peace knowing that I was friends with the pastor's family, and that they already weren't judging me, and they just wanted me to go along, meet the Father further and go further in our relationship. And so we went to that church for about a year, and my husband really, really started growing in his relationship with the Father at that time, and really started leaning into like being a biblical husband, being a biblical father, and not just being a good husband and a father, but being a biblical husband and a biblical father, and what that looks like, and being a man of God. And we went to that church for about a year, and then we felt called away from it, and we went to another church that was much larger. And it was actually, it said non-denominational, but it's definitely Pentecostal in flair. At that time, that church is what really started opening me up more to the Father. And there was a lot of work that was done on my husband at that time, because my husband's very, he doesn't like being center of attention. He is an incredibly smart man, but he doesn't just sit around and talk about all the things he knows. Like everything I talked about with sheep, the only reason I know that is because of my husband and obviously us doing it. But like, he was going out during what our church called Win Week and praying for people, like in the Walmart parking lot. And that was never my husband. That never. Like, that was so far from what my husband was like, but he was feeling led to do it. And he was really leaning into the Father, and he was praying for people in public. And the pastor that started calling us up, both my husband and I, to talk at church. Like, sometimes they have couples talk beforehand about what the Father's doing in your life. he did that, and they were doing that. And one of the things that happened when our house went into foreclosure, where I started feeling that hatred. So again, the father, July of 2019, 2 months postpartum, I find out our house is in foreclosure. October of 2019, we buy our first home ever. Like, the father, literally, we were so comfortable in that rental, but that's really what it was. We were so comfortable renting that house and being in that house and just living life that the father's like, no, I have bigger and better plans for you. You need to get out of here. And so just a few months later, we bought our first home ever.
It was like a blessing.
Didn't think it was. Yeah, it was huge, because at the time my husband was the only one working, because I was 2 months postpartum, and we always, like, when our first daughter was born, there will be one parent always at the house with the kids. We're homeschooling, we're not doing daycare, all that stuff. And so we made a lot of family choices that, like, we're not dual income and stuff like that. And so,
a question for you there. Why at that point? Okay. It seems like, I don't remember if you're a believer at that point yet. I mean, if you're close to, if this was before you're seeking God in the driveway, was this before that, when you had your first kid? Okay. Mm-hmm. So
our first.
What made you guys want to live that lifestyle? I usually equate those sort of kind of choices, such as homeschooling and one income, to believers usually, and like, but I must be wrong there.
Yeah, that was, again, my husband. Even when we weren't, like, really following the father, my husband was still definitely leading the charge. He didn't like the way the school system was. My niece and nephew at the time were both in the school system, and we saw what it was like. We also, the town we were living in was our hometown that we grew up in. And so we were able to see, like, kind of the degradation of education in that school system. And my husband, again, very independent, he didn't want somebody else teaching his kids about stuff that he felt was not appropriate for them to learn about at whatever age. And not because he's trying to control them or anything like that. He just is a very firm believer, and we still are, that there are certain things that are age appropriate and there's certain things that are not age appropriate. And we also didn't want, like, the pressures of, bullies and all that stuff. And my kids have had to deal with that over the years still, but he didn't want those pressures on them all the time. And so when we were pregnant, so at 24, when we were pregnant with our first daughter, that's when we were like, okay, we're homeschooling. Like, our kids, we do the co-ops, we do that our kids are in sports and gymnastics, and we've done all those things over the years. So they've still been around that kind of atmosphere some, but it's always just been homeschooling. We were always just going to do it. We didn't want people pushing their agendas on our kids.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I just had to ask that because, yeah. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, you're good. In this time period, so we get our first house ever, and it was the most gross little house you've ever seen. The winning quality of it for me was that it had a nice backyard. And at this time, we already had sheep. We had 60 chickens at the time when our rental went into foreclosure. We had to butcher all our chickens. All our sheep went to my father-in-law's house because he had land. And we bought a third of an acre in the middle of our historic downtown area. And that's all we could afford. And the house, everything was brown, and it was brown because there was, like, cigarette tar all over the walls, and there was, like, it had been empty for a while, so there was, like, a rat infestation. Like, it was gross. But we could afford the monthly payments, and we knew we wouldn't be living on the streets. And because that was a very humbling time period when I realized that our house was in foreclosure, or our rental was in foreclosure, was because I was like, whose couches can we sleep on? If they come tomorrow and say, if the county comes tomorrow and says, this house is ours, where can we sleep? Who can we stay with? And so when we were like, okay, we're going to buy this yucky little house, I at least knew we had a roof over our head and it was paid for and we were good. And so we actually ended up over the years that's when we were starting to go to the other church, where my husband's starting to pray for people and everything else. We start renovating the house because it needed it. Like, it was yuck. And, but it was clean enough and good enough for us to live in, and we weren't in any kind of dangerous situation or anything. And so we're renovating it as we're doing this, and as we're becoming closer to the Father. And our marriage this entire time, basically from about 25 years old through now, this time period in our lives, over the years, we were becoming a lot better as a couple. We were growing up a lot better together. We were putting the Father more at focus. It wasn't as much of, what do we want to be when we grow up? It's, what does the Father want us to be? Like, each of us in our own terms was, okay, Father, how do you want me to be a husband? Okay, Father, how do you want me to be a wife? How do you want me to be a mother? And same for him and his roles. And in 2020, we actually, beginning of 2020, my husband quit working for his father, who he'd worked for his entire life, because his father had a business since my husband was 5. And so my husband just always worked for his father. And my husband quit and started his own business. We actually grew microgreens in our garage in downtown. And so we always joked, because we sold little bags of green things out our front door. And we had heat lamps in our garage and everything else. But luckily, the sheriff's wife was one of our customers, so they knew what we were growing in our garage. But my husband, in literally the beginning of 2020, starts his microgreens business. I, at the time, had a full-time work-from-home job that allowed him to quit, allowed me to still be home with our kids, and we were all together as a family, which was this huge blessing, because that's something we always wanted, was for us to all be at home working together. And so my husband had his business. He's teaching our 3 girls how to grow microgreens and plants and all this stuff, and it was so much fun. And it was, again, beginning of 2020, it was probably March, is when the Father placed it on my heart to write my first book. And I was sitting in the church pews of the bigger church, because we were at the bigger church at that time, sitting in the church pews on a Wednesday night, and I'm just kind of looking around at everybody, and the pastor's talking, and because it was more Bible study-ish type service versus a big sermon or anything. And I'm just looking around at the other people, and I hear clear as day, I want you to write a book. And I was like, I got a little snarky. I was like, well, God, I can't write a book if you don't tell me what it's about. and I hear, I want you to share their stories, the people in the pews. I was like, okay. And by this point, we had actually already started following Torah some. And in that walk with I kind of got to backtrack a little bit there. As we're growing closer to the Father, in 2019 is when my husband also starts finding the Father through Torah. He is into preparedness and things like that, going along with the agricultural side of things. And he finds Pastor Joe Fox on YouTube through preparedness, but then he realizes that he had at the time a YouTube channel that was Shofar Mountain, where it's just his Bible studies. And so my husband starts, while we're at this big kind of mega church, he's also at home listening to these Bible studies by Pastor Joe Fox. And so now my husband's sitting there comparing what the pastors are teaching on Sunday and Wednesday to what Pastor Joe is talking about, like every other day of the week, because my husband was listening to him regularly, and starting to compare these notes. And it was actually Passover of 2019 when my husband and I did our first Passover, and it was like 2 weeks beforehand. And mind you, we had sheep at my in-laws' house, but I'm like, I don't know how to do anything with sheep. Like, what do we? So my husband's like, don't worry. He's like, we're going to go to Publix and buy steak. So we bought steak. That was it. We stopped doing Easter. We did steak, and we ate steak, and we're like, okay, we're eating steak. We're not doing pork anymore. I think there's this thing on Saturday we're supposed to do. So like, we were very slow. Like, we were not those people who took Torah on and ran with it. We questioned everything. And like, my husband would tell me stuff. I'm like, I think you're right, but I want to look at it too. And so like, I would watch then all the videos and everything else. I'm like, okay, yeah, you were right. And my husband just laughs because that's just the way we both are. And it's not that I'm like questioning my husband's authority, but like, I also want to learn too. And if he just comes at me with something, I'm like, well, I want to learn the stuff you learned, so let's learn it again together. So we had started following Torah at this point, still very new, into 2020. Again, I think by March of 2020, when the Father told me to write the book, we had literally only done switching to a Levitical diet and the Sabbath. That was it. We did Passover kind of with steak, but we still did Christmas. We still were doing everything else. We just were keeping the Sabbath and eating a little bit, like eating clean. And in March 2020 is when I start writing my book. And my husband, in that time period, he's still growing with the Father and growing with his convictions with following Torah and what we should be doing in regards to what the Bible says we're supposed to be doing versus what people are saying we're supposed to be doing. And so when I wrote my book, which was titled People in the Pews, I actually had the scriptural, because I use scriptural references throughout the book. And in the book, I had the scriptural references from the scriptures. And so it had Elohim, Yahweh, and stuff like that in the scriptures. But the view of the book was still slightly Pentecostal, because we were still kind of in that transition period of being more Pentecostal to, okay, now we're starting to follow Torah. But that book is what eventually launched to my publishing company, because that book, I wrote it in 7 months. It was, I believe, 12 interviews. I interviewed 12 people of what their life was like prior to, kind of like what we're doing now, their life was like prior to having the Father in their life, and then what their life was like after they met the Father and after they allowed him into their life. And so it's literally a book sharing 12 different people's testimonies of pre-Father, post-Father.
And this is all mainstream Christians, right? Not Torah observant
Yes.
Christians. Okay.
Yes, all completely mainstream Christians. Some of them were people I knew. Some of them were people who were like referred to me by people I interviewed in the book. And it was just really cool because there were so many different stories. Just like with the podcast you have, just the backgrounds were vastly different. And it was beautiful for me to see how these people had come to the Father. And when I got done with the book and it was published, by the time it was becoming published is the time that my husband and I knew our time was up in Florida, and that the Father was pushing us towards leaving. And we didn't necessarily know 100% where yet. We were kind of eyeing Oklahoma. We had done some travel years prior because we've always enjoyed the mountains. And so we've vacationed in mountains usually. And none of the mountains we'd ever gone to did we really like. And so my husband's like, what about Oklahoma? It has mountains. I'm like, it has tornadoes. But we live in Florida with hurricanes, but somehow.
What made you want to leave Florida? What was kind of the idea, the first thoughts of why did you want to leave?
Initially, both my husband and I just felt like we weren't supposed to be there anymore. And this was like while we're coming to the Father / getting a lot closer to him. But honestly, population, especially after 2020, the population exploded even in the town that we were from that was smaller. We didn't like how many people were around there. We didn't necessarily like the views and the culture of the area we were in. And it's not much different anywhere else in Florida than where we were at. We also just wanted a simpler life. And we wanted to be able to actually afford our life. Because Florida, even back before we moved, had a very high cost of living. And, like, we could only afford a third of an acre. Like, our first house we ever bought was a 1,200 square foot house on a third of an acre. And that's all we could afford. And it wasn't, like, tiny monthly payments either. It was moderate. It wasn't massive monthly payments. But, like, literally the monthly payments we had on the third of an acre with a 1,200 square foot house is the same monthly payments we have for our dream property now in Oklahoma. And the property's massive. So
that's pretty cool. It's pretty hard to argue with that.
Yeah. So we wanted a better cost of living because we also wanted our kids to be able to have, like, again, forward thinking of our kids' future and their cost of living. And we knew back then everything's going to go up and down and all around. But at the same time, we don't want to kind of like start them off for failure Because like right now, my sister pays $1,600 a month in rent for a 3-bedroom house on like a quarter of an acre in Florida. And that's cheap because a lot of places are $2,000 plus for a 3-bedroom house on a quarter of an acre in Florida. Like that's unattainable for, it'd be unattainable for us now. Like that's just ridiculous. So we knew then that our time was up because it had always kind of been in our mind. And actually, again, 2019 was a really pivotal year for us because in December of 2019 is the first time we ever came to Oklahoma. And so that's the first year, that's when we got our house. Like our house went into foreclosure, we bought a house, or rental went in foreclosure, we bought a house, we came to Oklahoma and realized Oklahoma's it. So when we were selling our house in December of 2020, because that's just what the father told my husband to do, with no plans other than buying a camper and living it on my in-laws' property for a little while, we knew we were going to be buying in Oklahoma. My book had just been released in January of 2021, and we closed on our house January 26th of 2021. And so bought a camper, we're living on my in-laws' property, and we're like, okay, yeah, what's next? And that's when it started. That's when the journey started to Oklahoma. But that's also when the journey really started too for Debarim Publishing, because the first book I ever wrote, I used a Christian publishing company, and I got paid royalties for the first 2 months it was for sale, and then never paid again. It's still in print. It's copywritten to me. It's always been copywritten to me. And since February of 2021, I've never seen any money from that book. And that is literally what led me to start my own publishing company, which wasn't even until years later. But that experience, I never wanted to have that happen
Was
again.
there any response when I'm guessing that you reached out to the publishing company and asked them what's going on? What was their response to why they were withholding?
Yeah, their response, basically they just lied a bunch. It was a big, huge runaround. Like this, oh, well, this, and let me get you to this person, and we'll talk about that, and everything else. And I'm asking them for sales reports. Like, can you please just send me the sales reports from each month? Because they're also telling me that books are being returned. But then they've also told me that more books have been returned than were ever even bought. Like, according to them anyways. And I was just like, this is really weird. This isn't lining up. And now you're trying to make me pay for books that got returned that have no history of being sold. And so I would reach out to them multiple times. They would transfer me around a bunch of different people, and I never got anywhere. I reported them to Better Business Bureau, went through that channel for a while, and still, like, nothing happened. And then they finally just never responded to me. They stopped responding to any email I ever sent.
What is the name of this publishing company, if you don't mind sharing it? You don't have to.
Yeah. No, it's fine. It's Xulon Press, Xulno.
And they're still printing your book. They're still offering it for sale.
Last I checked, it was still on Amazon, but it was being sold through Amazon UK. It's no longer being sold through Amazon US. But yes, up until this year, it was sold on Amazon US.
That's weird. It seems evil and wrong. It seems like they're breaking the law there.
Yes. I was so mad. I was so mad. I did not get mad at the father over that, though, but I was so mad because I literally wrote the book from like 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. almost every night for 7 months because I had children that I was homeschooling. I was working full time. I was helping my husband market his business. So in my, quote, free time from 10 a.m. to 3 a.m., I'm writing this book that the father told me I'm supposed to. And I was more mad at the publishing company because I knew that from my past, that's something that could make someone walk away from the father.
Yeah.
Because this is, and I honestly, I sat there and I was mad personally because I'm like, this isn't right. You're stealing from me. But I was also mad, I guess, spiritually and praying for anybody who used them because I didn't want that to hinder anybody's walk with the father. Because here's all these Christian authors trying to write books and share them with the world and whatever the father's placing on their heart, and they're, you know, I don't necessarily do it to be rich, but at the same time, like, a workman's worth their hire. Like, you should be paying somebody for the work they do.
It's not easy to write a book.
Yeah,
it's
no,
not easy to write, a book that can be read.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Tell us about Debarim Publishing and, a little. And, well, as you tell the story.
We moved. 2021 was a whirlwind. That's when the book came out. We ended up going back and forth to Oklahoma multiple times within a few month time period. And that's when the father just lined everything up for us to get our dream property. We moved on our dream property. And it is our dream property, but it had no electrical, it had no running water. We were completely off grid for a long time. And then my husband gets a job where he's traveling. And so we're off grid in the middle of Oklahoma. And for the first time, and we brought all our animals with us to Oklahoma. So we have all our sheep and our chickens and everything else. And now I'm homesteading on our property alone with our kids. Because my husband's traveling sometimes for work. And so it was a fun adjustment, and the father really used that time to work on my husband and I both individually. And it was also during that time period where my husband was traveling and everything else, that I really started, both my husband and I actually really started gaining a really strong relationship with the father individually. And I know that the father pulled us apart because my husband traveled almost 6 months out of the year. Like, it wasn't consistent 6 months, but over the course of a year, my husband traveled for about 6 months. And we had been together for so long and always together. Even when we were dating, we were just always together. And I believe very intensely that the father pulled us apart so that we could grow more with him. That our focus, and that was one of the things I actually, like, every time my husband left, he joked, I had an epiphany about something with my relationship with the father, or something about, like, something within myself that needed worked on that I didn't even realize needed worked on, but the father worked on me through it while my husband was gone. And it was also a time where my husband and I really grew in our relationship and really started focusing, like, we had already been kind of like, okay, what makes a biblical husband and wife, but really leaning into that. And one of the times he was home, I was having trouble sleeping, and I woke up pretty early, and I went outside and was walking up and down our driveway, and it was really early, like, it was still dark out, and I'm watching the sun come up, and I'm hearing all, like, the last hoot of the owl, and all these things happening around me. And I was so aware of them. And I've been up early in the morning before, especially when my husband was traveling to, like, do farm stuff. But that morning was so different. I was so acutely aware of all my surroundings, and it was just insane. And I love pictures. I love taking pictures. I love photography. And so I'm just snapping away pictures and all this stuff. And then I just stop in the middle of my driveway because all these words just start coming to me. And so I had my phone on me. I didn't have anything else on me. So I go to my notes section of my phone and I just start typing. And I start typing out everything that I'm hearing in my head, I guess you could say. And so I'm just typing everything out, and I get done and I was just like, oh my gosh, I wrote a children's book. Because it was clearly like a kid's book, like talking about the earth waking up. But then it had a poem that included the father, and I am horrible at poetry, like, but it had a poem in it, and like all this stuff. Like, I get done and I look at it, I was like, oh my goodness, I just wrote a children's book, which is the first book I'd written since my previous experience, and I'd never written a children's book before. And so I go up, it's about 7 o'clock now. I had been out since probably about 4 a.m. So at 7 o'clock, I run up to our camper and I like bust in our camper door. My kids are already awake. My husband's just starting to wake up. And I look at him like, I think I wrote a book. He goes, you did what? He's like, what time is it? I was like, it's 7 a.m. I think I wrote a book. He's like, okay, read it to me. He's like, how long? I'm like, it's a kid's book. He's like, okay, read it to me. And so I read him this book and he goes, that is a kid's book. You have to publish it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to read it to the kids real quick. And I read it to the kids and they're like, that's so good, Mommy. We love that. And I'm like, all right, cool. My kids like it. And then I'm like, and now I have to put it down because it's Shabbat. So it's Shabbat morning. And I literally just drop my phone and don't touch it all day because I'm business minded, so my brain will start running in who's going to be the artist, who's da-da-da-da, like all that stuff. I'm like, nope, I'm done, not even going to touch it. My husband was even like, don't touch your phone all day. I don't want to see you looking at it because I don't want to think you're looking at the book. I was like, I'm not looking at it. And then that night, once sundown happened, then I'm looking at it and I was like, okay, this will be this page and these words will be that page. And I reached out to a friend who was an artist, and within a few months, my second book, I Saw the Earth Wake Up, was published, and it's published through Debarim Publishing. Because when I started on that book, that children's book, I was looking for publishers. But the book literally teaches Torah. Like it has scripture in it for kids to learn about Torah, but through a homesteading animal type setting. And like the pictures I took that morning, the author actually was able to draw them out and put them in the book. So like my cats are in the book, our puppies are in the book, like our sheep are in the book, because those were the pictures that I was taking, and I saw the earth wake up. And so I was looking for publishers that could do all the editing and everything else, but were Torah observant, because I was like, I'm not going the other route again. Plus, I highly doubt they're going to publish it anyways because it teaches Torah. And I was like, well, I can't find anybody to do it, so I may as well just do it myself. And so I started doing it myself, figured out all the stuff, figured out the printing side of things, and finding a printer that works with the big box stores as well as like smaller stores, and just did all the research on how to figure it out. And during this time period, we had a friend who found out about it, and he basically, one night, a whole bunch of us were at dinner, and he's like, hey, so-and-so, he's like, by the way, you got a book? She's gonna have a publishing company. And I was like, I started the publishing company to publish my own books. I didn't start the publishing company for other people, but okay, I guess I'm doing it now. And so that started my first book, which is S.K. Fox, actually Pastor Joe Fox's wife's book, Homesteading Hints. And so that was the first book I ever published that was not my own. And so end of 2022 is when I published I Saw the Earth Wake Up. And by January of 2023, I have 4 authors signed, and I'm publishing books for other people.
Whoa, that's great.
Yeah.
What was SK's book about then? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's really good because it breaks down, like, if you want to become a homesteader, if you have zero experience whatsoever, these are the things you should be paying attention to. Or if you were like us, who sold everything they owned and left the city to move to the middle of nowhere, off-grid, like, this is what you should be looking for when buying a property. And so it goes through, if you have goats, if you live off-grid, if you have sheep, if you have cows, or if you want any of those things, how to work with the land and checking to make sure that the water on your land is good before you buy the land, and all these different things that go into buying a property and starting a homestead. And she goes through fencing and everything else. It gets very, very thorough. Both her and PJ have been homesteading for well over a decade. And so she's using all that experience. She even talks about like finding out where your water department is even located and all this stuff. And so it's just a really good, it's not a very big book, but it's incredibly thorough, and it's written very well. So it's like this chapter is on livestock. This chapter is on buying land. So if you've already bought the land, you can probably skip that chapter and go on to like the fencing and livestock and what kind of equipment you should have based off the terrain of your property and stuff like that. She even goes into, if you don't want to use or can't use like electrical type tools or whatever, what kind of hand tools or other kind of things you should be using.
Wow.
So it's just very thorough and very well written, coming from someone with experience, and then myself reading it as someone who has experience with livestock and doing the things she talks about. I was super stoked because it was such a good book.
And now, all right, how many books have you published up to today then? And I know you have a couple in the works.
Yes. So the 6th book, I literally just sent him the proof for printing. And so once he says, yes, I'm good to go, that book will be in print. That book that's coming up, it's called Era of the Lawless. It's an apologetic style book. And it actually takes basically every New Testament scripture that people try to say we don't have to follow the old covenant, we can do our own thing. All those scriptures, he's like, here's the assertion, here's my response, but it's all biblical. Like, it's none of, like, I think this, that, and the other. It doesn't say anything about what he thinks. It's literally just points back to scripture in the Bible that negates the current arguments that most modern Christians give us.
That's great.
So, yeah, so that's the 6th book, but I did 4 books in 2023 that were not mine. I've done 2 books so far in 2024. I have a 3rd book that I've already proofread and sent back to the author for revisions. So I'm technically on book number 7 right now. And then that author that I'm working with right now on revisions, she has a 2nd book that she is already mostly done writing. And so by the end of 2024, probably 8 books total that I'll have either published and or working on that are not my own. And then I have my own.
Do you like this work? Has it been enjoyable for you?
Yes, I do. There's times where it gets very, very, very tedious. And it can be a little bit difficult with children running around me, trying to read a manuscript and have 4 children running around me. But it is really beautiful to see what the Father places on people's hearts to share, because like SK's book is not Torah at all. Like, it doesn't say anything about Torah in it. It is strictly homesteading. But at the same time, like, that can help people. And I know for a fact the Father has used agriculture to help myself, my husband and myself, come back to him, because we can see the oh my gosh, sheep are literally the best animals to ever have if you want to learn about the Father. Like, all the parables start making sense. Like, you can just see things. It's phenomenal. So even though her book's not Torah, it's still incredibly helpful, and it will help. I know it has and will help a lot of people. And then the other books, there's one that was fiction that I've published, and it teaches Torah, but not like in an overt way. It just starts talking about the people and the holidays that they're, the biblical holidays that they're following and things like that. But it doesn't even start off that way. It basically, the woman in the story comes to Torah through interactions with other people. And in the beginning of the book is her living a very difficult life. And it's fictional, though, completely just made up stories, but it's a beautiful novel. And so I love seeing how the Father is using different people and using different ways of teaching people about him, whether it's him specifically or the Torah or anything else. It's just been really beautiful to watch. And also, like, I haven't necessarily, I have publicized Debarim Publishing, but I haven't at the same time, because I only take on as much as I can handle with working with children and everything else, because Debarim Publishing isn't my full-time job, it's my part-time job. But with everything else in our family, like, we still homeschool our children, and that takes precedence over me reading a book and things like that. So I don't take on more than what I can handle at a time, to where I'm still an attentive wife and mother. But at the same time, the Father has always provided. I've never not had a book that I've been working on. And that's really cool too, because it's all been like word of mouth and people sharing. And I'm really thankful for that, because I know the Father wants me doing this, like, without a shadow of a doubt. I know he wants me doing this. And I'm thankful, because I have not lived a great life. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm not some pastor orator that's going to be on some major stage or anything like that necessarily, but he used my bad experience with a publishing company to create this publishing company. And now I pray it continues to be a safe space for Torah Observant authors to be able to publish their books without having to deal, like, I don't make authors change their words. I make it look professional, and I clean it up a lot and everything else. But if those are the words the Father has placed on somebody's heart, I'm not going to change it, because that's between them and the Father. I'm just here to make it look pretty. And so that's what I do.
Do you have any level of vetting that you do if someone comes to you and they say, Sarah, I have this book and it's great, and then they give it to you and you're like, oh, it's not great. What do you do? Has that happened yet? Or,
Yeah, so typically what I do is I do a consultation initially with an author. A lot of times they'll reach out to me through my website, and I'll set up a time to talk to them, and we talk about the book. I also I did get my degree in journalism, so I do have a background in this, but I also kind of interviewed them because I want to see somewhat of like, even though they follow Torah, like, what do they mean by that? Like, what, not necessarily what's their definition, but like, what do they mean by they follow
it's like,
Torah?
how crazy are you? Is that the interview?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. But at the same time, like, if they're brand new, that's fine. If they've been doing it for 30 years, that's fine. But there's certain things, like certain topics that we can discuss that I like can tell if they're following man-made doctrine or whatever. And so I kind of just get an idea of what the author is like, personality-wise, everything else. From that point on, I will ask them for a couple chapters of their book so that I can review it. And so like the one book that I had mentioned earlier, I'll say its name, it's Eyes of Grace, the fiction book. It starts off really rough in the sense that the woman is trafficked in the book. And so she sent me the first 3 chapters, and you can see that like it's progressing away from that, and she's going to be saved from it. So it's actually a really beautiful story, but it starts off rough. And then I read up until her kind of starting to get to that point of being saved and taken out of that situation. I was like, okay, you say it has Torah in it. I haven't seen anything Torah yet, which is fine. Can you send me a couple chapters towards the end, though? And so she sent me the couple chapters towards the end. I'm like, okay, all right, we're good. And so I got an idea of what the book was about. And that's what I do with every author. Send me a few chapters. I'll read it through. And it also kind of gives me an idea, too, of what I will have to do with editing, because every author has their certain words they really love to use, or I can tell that punctuation just isn't a thing for them, or whatever. So it kind of gives me an idea of how much editing I'm probably going to have to do anyways. But I'll do the...
Would you ever, if you saw one and it was just bad, would you ever just be like, I'm sorry, we can't work together?
Yeah, and I tell authors up front, I'm like, we're not doing a cult, we're not doing like sexual stuff or anything like that. Like, we're sticking biblical. If it was really, really bad, like a cult or just graphic of any kind, yeah, I'd say to them, sorry guys, this isn't a good fit. Like, we're not doing this.
What if they were just horrible writers?
Oh, horrible writers? Oh, that's fine.
That's fine.
That's fine. You're just going to get a lot of edits, suggested edits in the proofreading, because I do like full service publishing. So you send me your unedited manuscript, and I take that and work with you throughout the entire process, and then you get a book at the end of it. And I do the cover art, interior layout, everything. And
will you help? Like, if the story needs help making sense, do you do the overarching kind of edit as well? You're like, all right, you need an intrusion. I don't know how deep you go here.
No, I do. So the last book I published was called Suicide Sobriety, and it's actually a gentleman's struggle with suicide ideation, how he overcame it with the Father, and including Torah and everything else in it. It was actually really cool. Beautiful. Like, not beautiful, but like really well written book. And it's not medical. It's biblical and personal, and it does have scientific references and stuff like that too. Incredibly well written book. No conclusion whatsoever. It just all of a sudden was like, the end. And I said to him, I was like, hey, this is an amazing book. Absolutely love it. We're working on it. You have to put a conclusion though. Like, not necessarily, it's not a story like with a storyline necessarily. There's certain chapters on like PTSD and everything else. I was like, but you need to have some sort of ending that ties all of the topics that you talked about within suicide together. And he chose the story of Elijah, and how Elijah was just like, Father, end it. And basically he ends the book with, if he had ended it, where would Elisha have been? And all the rest of the prophets that came after Elijah, like if Elijah was just like, Father, end it, I'm tired, I don't want to do this anymore, just let me die, what would have happened? And so I was like, that's fantastic, there you go. Good end and good wrap up to everything.
Wow.
So yeah, there's times where
Everybody needs a good editor.
yeah, there's times where I've been
Everybody.
like, you need to fix this, that, or the other thing. And there's been times where it's like, this detracts completely from the storyline, delete these 5 pages. And now when I work with authors with that, it is not a mandatory requirement. Because at the same time, some people are very particular about their books, and that's fine. But at the same time, for it to look professional, it should have this done to it. And for the most part, every author I've ever sent edits to has been like, okay, cool, yes, that stuff is good for you to fix. We'll fix it. I haven't had anybody push back too much. So it's worked out pretty well so far.
That's awesome. Wow, this is exciting. So people can go to your website, Debarim Publishing, and they can reach out to you about this.
Yes. Yeah, it shares like the different services that I offer. It also shares different artists. So with books, I'll do graphic design. I am not an illustrator. And so if somebody has like a children's book or they want an actual drawn picture done for their cover, I have Torah Observant artists that I work with and that I've not contracted with. Basically, I've just kind of reached out to the Torah Observant community and been like, hey, who's an artist? And so on the Debarim Publishing website, there is actually also a list of artists that will work with people to do artwork for the books. They already know, like the artist already knows about Debarim Publishing. They've signed an agreement that if I send them somebody, they're open to working with them. Now, granted, based on the artist's timeline, that may affect the publishing of a book and everything, but there are still people that I can reach out to if people need artwork done that's not just graphic arts, because I can do graphic arts all day. Drawing and stuff like that, no, not doing that.
I do have an illustrator to recommend to you then, the guy who did the stuff for our book. And he's really
Awesome.
good. Jesus, he's a Torah Observant guy.
Sweet.
I'll send you his info. But okay,
great.
all right. So that's Debarim. Do you have other things we have to talk about too? So what came next in your journey?
So, kind of because of the artists, I was starting to try to create more of a network of Torah Observant individuals who work on books in general or have those kind of skill sets. Because yes, I do editing, but if I start getting more books than what I can handle, then I can also still hire out for certain things that would make the process a lot easier. And so I started collecting editors and like the artist and digital layout, even like beta readers and stuff like that, to start trying to create this more comprehensive package basically to offer authors. From that idea, I started realizing, I'm like, well, there's really good website designers, and there's really good this, and there's really good that, and there's all these people that are really good at things they do that are Torah Observant, and it's not just books. That like I can't hire someone to crochet for me or something like this stuff doesn't work. But I want to still share that they're a good business, and so end of 2023, I started thinking about, well, I'm like, what if there was like a marketplace for all these Torah Observant people to share their stuff, kind of like Etsy and also Fiverr, because Fiverr is for freelance professionals. So like myself as a writer, I could go on Fiverr and get jobs to write for people, freelance. And so I was like, well, what if there was like a Fiverr and Etsy, but for Torah Observant people? And so I looked around for it quite a bit, actually. I was like, I don't really see anything like what I'm thinking about. And in March 2024, actually, at the Refuge Ruckus, which is my full-time job, is with Kaleb House. But it was an event for Kaleb House. And I'm sitting in my hotel room because I can't sleep because it's the night before the ruck. And I'm praying on this marketplace that the Father has placed on my heart. And I hear him say 3 months. And I was like, oh no, it's got to be done in 3 months, because I was praying on when should it be done? What should we do? I was kind of lollygagging. I was fully on, like, the Father's giving me this idea, it sounds really cool. I know he wants me to do it, but I just, I'm kind of busy. I got other stuff going on in my life. I'll just keep pushing it off. And then I was praying on it, and I hear 3 months, and I was like, oh, okay, all right. Well, I had already been talking to a friend of mine who, talented Torah Observant people, knows how to code and build websites. And so I had already been talking to him about it. And I text him, I think probably at 3 o'clock in the morning, and said, just to let you know, it's got to be done by June. And he sees me the next morning because he was helping out with the ruckus as well, too. And he looks at me, he's like, really, Sarah? June? Right? Really? And I'm like, that's just what I was told. He's like, all right. And so he had already kind of been fiddling with it. And so he worked on it pretty hard. I did not do anything in regards to the marketplace in the sense of like coding. I did like the graphic design and stuff like that and the wording. So in that time period, Kehilla was started, and Kehilla it's Hebrew for community or congregation. So Kehilla means congregation or community, and that's what community marketplace kind of thing. And that's where Kehilla was started. I sent him all these different things that I wanted on the website in relation to like professionals, like people who can add their professional talents, like accountants, HR, legal, business administration, whatever. And then also artistic with writing, graphic design, web design, crocheting, like literally anything and everything. And so we started working on the foundation of Kahila with my ideas, my thought processes. I started creating artwork for it. And then also his background of coding and everything else. And so we spent quite a few months working on that together and got it to where it was functional by June, in the sense of like we had a landing page, people could see what it was about, and there was still a lot of background stuff we had to do to actually make it functional in the sense of marketplace, but we at least had a place for people to see what was coming. And we worked on that a lot more. There was a lot of back and forth, even so like my husband, he has been involved in this as well too with ideas, and one of the ideas that I believe they came up with was also including farm to table. And so like obviously I'm not like shipping sheep necessarily across the country or anything like that right now, but like if I am selling sheep meat locally, then people could like click on my store and see that they can buy sheep, like they can buy lamb or mutton from me within my zip code if they live near it, that kind of thing. And so like creating like just honestly an overall marketplace where Torah observant people can connect their businesses to each other, even if they already have their own website. So like there's some businesses that are on Kahila already. They have their own website. They sell on Etsy, but you know what? It's just another market of advertising. And so they list some of their stuff on our website too. And it is very much so like Etsy, where somebody buys something from you, they pay through Stripe or whatever, and then you get sent the money and everything else. And then you have to ship from your location. I'm not shipping anything. I'm obviously not providing someone else's professional services. They set those fees as well too, but it allows people to be able to come together and meet and support the community. Do they pay you, or do you take a cut? How do you make any money for being this platform? Yeah. So it's a percentage, just like with Etsy and Fiverr, eBay, Amazon, whatever you sell through, not nearly as high. But we do set a set amount of a cut for the services provided, basically. Okay. We have right now, and we're like testing it out, because obviously Stripe has Stripe fees. Like if you go to any restaurant or anything like that, a lot of times there's like an extra 3% for Stripe or whatever, or you get a 3% discount if you pay with cash. Right now we have it set up to where the buyer actually pays the Stripe fee, because a lot of these businesses are very mom and pop style, that even a 3% cut can be a lot for them. So that's like on top of the amount that we take. But right now we're testing it out that way. Okay. A lot of other like Etsy and stuff like that, they like Etsy has their, I think 6.5% plus 3% for Stripe plus another percent for something else, I think. Whoa. that the seller gets cut out of their amount. So if you list a blanket for $15, you get 6.5 taken out, then another 3%, then another other percent. So you're getting around 10 to 12% taken out of your overall price. So what we're trying to do right now is kind of mitigate that cost a little bit for the sellers, and then the buyer pays that 3% stripe fee.
Okay.
We'll see how it works, but that's kind of where we're at right now.
It would be cool if
right
there
now
were
it's trial.
a Torah payment processor. Maybe that's next.
So that's actually so the tech friend, he is actually very, very techy. And right now with the website, you can buy and sell and everything like that on the site. You can create all your listings, whether it's accounting or crocheting chickens. Like, it doesn't matter. And people can search for you and everything else. Well, within that, the goal is to eventually, yes, have our own payment processing system that's not Stripe. Because we do have friends that have used Stripe for certain businesses, and now Stripe is giving those individuals a difficult time and not allowing them to use Stripe anymore. And so Stripe is getting a lot more picky, I guess you could say, about certain things. And so the goal is to eventually have our own payment processing system within the site. Just like within the site, we have the goal of having all the stores choose a Shabbat. Like, a lot of times with different websites, you can choose a Shabbat mode.
Oh, yeah.
And so you're closed for Shabbat. Our site doesn't have that yet, just because we're not there yet with like the back end of stuff. But eventually all shops will choose a Shabbat mode, and all buyers will as well too, because there's different time zones. So different people are in Shabbat at different times. Also, all the stores are Torah Observant, but anybody can buy from the stores. So this is kind of like a little way of seed planting. I don't care if you're mainstream Christian or not, you're still going to pick a day from, I don't care if it's Tuesday at sundown to Wednesday at sundown, whatever, but you're going to pick whatever time period is your Shabbat.
That's great.
And so eventually buyers and sellers will have to pick Shabbat mode.
That is great. And before I forget, Matt Hoffman, who I interviewed, who lives north of you in Missouri, was working on a payment processor, or was talking with some people. They have some app they call the Everything app. I don't know. And they may have some kind of Torah payment processor if you don't want to make everything in-house. I don't know the details about that, but if I find out, I'll let you know.
I'll check it out for sure.
Wow. Okay. Goodness gracious. You're doing so much. I told you it was going to be a lot. So, all right. How'd you get linked up with Kaleb House then?
So Kaleb House, again, kind of just a father thing. When we moved out here to Oklahoma, we didn't know anybody or anything really. We toured a few different counties. And the county that we're in, we're like, this is home. This is 100% home. This is where the Father wants us. Same with the property we're on. This was where the Father wanted us, everything else. And so we moved out here with no expectations of really ever meeting anybody. And it just so happened that there was a gentleman that my husband kind of knew through an online Torah men's Bible study group that my husband was doing on Saturday nights. He knew that he lived out here, but he didn't know how close or anything like that. We didn't expect to see him. And so my husband and him met, and my husband then eventually started meeting his friends, and it turns out that some of his friends were very independent with Refuge Medical. And shortly after we moved here, we actually started going to Erev Shabbats and stuff like that with TJ and the congregation that's here in Oklahoma. And it kind of came out that, because we moved out here without any jobs or anything like that. We had our savings from selling our house, and we were going to figure it out when we got here because that's what the Father had us do. And it found out that my husband needed a job. Also found out that my husband was pretty good at talking to people, which is what happened when He was when we were in the big church back in Florida. I feel like the father was starting to train my husband from that point on to start working and talking with people, because my husband was hired to be the lead role player for Refuge Training. And that's when my husband was traveling. So my husband, Refuge Training basically teaches people how not to die. And if you're in an active shooter scenario or whatever, like if someone gets hurt or you get in a car accident or whatever, how do you, as a civilian, help those people and prevent them from dying, or basically sustaining life long enough for an ambulance to get there? And so my husband became the lead role player for Refuge Training. So my husband was the bad guy who shot everybody with the sim guns, and he loved it. But he got to pray for people. He got to like baptize people on these trips that he would go on, and like he was teaching people how not to die and how to sustain life. But at the same time, he was there ministering as well, in a different role than like the instructors. The instructors definitely had a lot more like interpersonal contact, but my husband was the person that, he was the bad guy in the room. Anytime you were in a bad situation, my husband was the bad guy. But it worked out really well. He came home with a lot of bruises, but it worked out really well. So with being a part of Refuge Training, as Kaleb House began to grow, when we moved to Oklahoma, the father told me to wait on employment. I have, like, even with children, I usually just worked part-time to like kind of help make ends meet. So like when my husband was home from work, I would work sometimes part-time at a restaurant, just a few hours a week to like give us a little extra cushion. Again, we homeschool, we want our kids home, things like that. I was specifically told by the father not to work, period, once we came to Oklahoma, which worked out because my husband ended up getting a job where he was traveling, and I wouldn't have been able to hold a job of any kind anyways, with my husband being gone sometimes 2 to 3 weeks at a time. When my husband was working with Refuge Training is when Kaleb House started. Kaleb House was initially a division, basically, of Grindstone Ministries. Grindstone Ministries is a disaster relief ministry that was started by the same founder of Refuge Medical and Refuge Training. And so my husband was already working for Refuge Training. We were fellowshipping with everybody. We kind of got to know everybody, became friends, things like that. And then as Kaleb House started growing, they realized that they needed somebody who was good at doing events and fundraising, and has, worked with nonprofits, things like that. Previously, back in Florida, I was a president of a nonprofit. I served with several different nonprofits. I did a lot of work with training and events and professional jobs that I held. So I got a phone call one day after a board meeting, and my friend called me. He's like, "Hey, Sarah, you want to be the event manager for Kaleb House?" And this was, I think, 2 months after I had started Debarim Publishing and 1 month postpartum with our youngest child. And I was like, he's like, "It's just part-time." I'm like, "Cool," because I just had a baby. He's like, "It's just part-time for now, but like if it turns out that you're working enough to work full-time because you have to do events and stuff like that, let us know. We'll move you up to full-time." And that's basically how it started. So my husband had gone on several missions with Grindstone Ministries on disaster relief stuff, like to Kentucky and Idabel. So they knew my husband really well in that sphere of disaster relief and working with others, especially also too with Refuge Training and Refuge Medical. And then known enough about me to know who I am, what I'm like, and they knew that I had that kind of career history. So they hired me onto Kaleb House. I did work part-time for several months. And then towards the end of 2023 is when I moved to full-time, which worked out because I was like, as I was planning the Refuge Ruckus, and that's a huge event that the Kaleb House has each year. So it worked out because with that full-time employment, I was still working from home. So I'm still with my kids. Like I'm blessed because I can set my schedule and like I get my work done. But if there's times where I just have to work on paperwork, well, I don't have to do that during the day. I can do that at night after my kids are in bed. So I get the job done, but sometimes it fluctuates when I'm doing it based on what I need to do that day. And then sometimes I'll take my kids to the park in the middle of the day because I can. but I still get my work done because that's a paperwork day, and I'm just going to do part of it in the morning before they wake up, or like while they're playing outside, and then I'll do the rest of it after they go to bed. And so it just makes it work. But it's been a huge blessing. And so Kaleb House is a restoration house for trafficked children. And I do all the event management for it. I do the fundraising side of it. Any community outreach we do locally, I'm the one doing it. Like ribbon cuttings for chambers, everything like that. I'm a part of it in that way.
Can you tell us? I mean, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I had the pleasure to be at the Refuge Ruckus last year, and you did a great job coordinating everything. I think everyone had a blast. Can you tell us? Can you give us a little? I know you weren't probably ready for this, but can you give us a little update on Kaleb House right now? Like what you just told us what it is. Can you tell us where you are? I know that like there was construction. There is active construction, if I'm right, going on to build homes for these children. Who? Okay. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that?
We have 2 buildings under construction currently, and our general contractors have 3 more in the planning stages. We've actively been working with volunteers that have been able to come out and donate hundreds upon hundreds of hours to helping with Kaleb House. The restoration side of things is basically Kaleb House takes children out of horrible situations and where they are being trafficked, and unfortunately a lot of times it's by family. But Kaleb House takes children out of these situations, provides them with a loving, safe environment to live in, and then we work with them on the restoration side of things. So there is construction where we're working on and building our facility, and our general contractors are amazing people. They're a fantastic team. They get so much work done. It's been beautiful to watch the progress that's happened since they've come onto the Kaleb House team. But there's a construction side of it, but there's also the rehabilitation. So any children, and we do have like women and children in our care. So if we're, taking women with their children out of bad situations, all of them go through therapy. All of them receive any kind of housing, clothing, any kind of basic necessity care we provide for them. Food, shelter, everything. We also work with the legal side of things. So when we have people that come into our care, women and children that come into our care, we're trying to put the bad guys behind bars too. Because we don't want these people to continue to come after the victims, because that's totally a thing. Bad guys want their property back, and so we don't want them getting their property back. So we're going to put them behind bars. And so our victim services team are really well adapted at working with the judicial side of things as well too, working within local, state, federal type entities to be able to gather the necessary evidence or give them the information we have in order for them to convict the bad guys. And so there's the therapy side of things of restoring these children. And like future plans, like big overarching is like, these kids are gonna, if they want to go to college, we'll pay for college. If they want to go to tech school, they'll go to tech school. Like all these things, like providing for their future. And like with the women, jobs. They're still moms, but they need employment to be able to pay for life once they receive the amount of therapy they need. So providing them with jobs that allow them to still be home with their kids too. And just really working with all of them at whatever level they may be at, because obviously it's going to be a little bit different for the age groups that we may get in, but really meeting them where they're needed. And it's also not like a month or year-long program. So Kaleb House is, if we have children that come into our care, it's until 18. Even if they're little, they're coming into our care and we're taking care of them, because these kind of things aren't things that are very quickly dealt with. So like I was sexually assaulted at 19 years old. It took me several years, and I didn't go to therapy. I just worked through it. And it took me several years to work through it. And these children, they're assaulted regularly, multiple times a day sometimes. So my one time is nothing compared to multiple times that these children could be enduring over years. So this is not a 1 year, kids fix, they went to, 80 sessions of therapy, they're good. No, this is continual. This is also instilling the love of the Father in them. So Kaleb House is a Torah Observant ministry. So guess what? These children are doing the biblical feast, and they're doing eating clean and all that. They're observing the Sabbath. And whether they have had experience with that or not, that's what's happening within their homes, that they're being taken care of. And so teaching them the Father and the Father's ways, and that the Father loves them and saved them and everything else, but making sure that they're getting the continued therapy they need so that they go out as 18, 19, 20-year-olds, whatever, and join the workforce or go to college or whatever, and they're mentally and emotionally prepared to be able to be in those situations and be able to handle whatever life throws at them, so that they themselves don't become predators, or that they don't become prey again, because predators can recognize people have been abused before, unfortunately, and we don't want them to become victims again once they are no longer under the covering of Kaleb House. And so just really kind of creating a lifelong recovery back to, I can't say back to, but to a better place that the Father wants them, versus somewhere that the world's going to try to throw them.
Wow. It is such a beautiful thing that you guys do. So you're making them strong. You're making them strong enough to stand on their feet in the world after this has happened. My gosh. Or so are they just living in with volunteer families basically currently and is the construction kind of like orphanage style where they're all going to live together, or what's that plan?
So they're safe right now. I can't go into like too much details about current living arrangements, but they're safe right now. The future plans in the style of housing and everything would be house parent type model. So there would be a husband and a wife and it would be a husband and a wife, not just a man and woman living together, but it would be a husband and a wife that are taking care of the children. And they go through all the training. Like the parents would go through all the trainings, all the certifications, and the parents themselves would receive therapy like regularly because of what the kids have gone through. They're going to have to work with the kids through that. And that can still get emotionally taxing on the adults too. And so they will go through continual certification, obviously like CPR and first aid trained and everything else as well too. But these house parents will be trained specifically for these kind of children to come in. Because unfortunately, like if you think of the foster care system, a child goes into foster care who's been trafficked because there's not a lot of restoration facilities. There's only like around 430-ish beds in the United States right now for children who've been trafficked. And this is like a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. And so it doesn't work out that there's not anywhere near the amount of beds in America to take care of all the children that are pulled out of trafficking situations. So what happens a lot of times is these children go into foster care. Well, if you sign up to be a foster parent, your heart's in it for a good reason, but you're not trained on how to work with children who have been like sexually abused day in and day out for 10 years. Like that's not something, like foster care is not necessarily a good place for these children to be in. Besides the fact too, a lot of times when someone has been abused in this way, if they are not restored and receive the therapy and everything else that they need, a lot of times they actually become predators themselves. And so let's just say one child who is sexually abused and trafficked, when they grow up, they didn't talk to anybody about it. They didn't receive therapy. They just kind of grew out of it because they're no longer wherever they were at, where they were being abused. Typically, that one person who doesn't receive therapy or any kind of help whatsoever creates 82 more victims. And so with Kaleb House, like our goal is to have these environments where there's these parents who are fully trained on how to work with these children, but then they're also going to therapy. Like they're speaking to trauma therapists and people who are very well versed in working with women and children and everything else that have been through these kind of situations. So they're in environments where people understand what they've been through. They're there to help. They're there to love on them. And they're there to help them make them better and to overcome what they've been through. So Kaleb House right now, there's just Kaleb House, the initial facility, but the goal is to have Kaleb Houses across the country and in multiple Kaleb Houses in every state if needed, because there's just not enough beds. There's, gosh, what is it, like 42 kids a day are taken into trafficking situations in America, and we only have 430 beds. Like, you only have like basically a month, not even a couple weeks worth of children are taken into trafficking, and that already exceeds beds that we have available in the United States. So that's what we're trying to combat.
Wow. Thank goodness. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's awesome. It's horrible that this even has to exist, but I'm so glad that you guys are working to help the situation as much as possible.
Thank you.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
It's not something that was ever really on my radar. It's just like with everything else the Father's done in my life. It's just that's where He's put me, and that's where I'm at now, and I'll keep doing it until He tells me to do something else.
I'm glad you're doing a lot of things. Okay, have we talked about everything you're doing? And have we finished your story as well? What else do we need to talk about? And do we need to go back to your story? Which I keep interrupting over and over again.
You're good. No, honestly, once we moved to Oklahoma, by the time we were in Oklahoma, we were following Torah completely, like we were doing all the feasts and everything else. So basically December of 2020 was our last Christmas, and it was that Christmas where my husband's like, we're not doing this anymore. And I'll be completely honest, I was like, but the tree and the kids and the all the fun. And then he's like, all right, Sarah, go research it for yourself. And I did. I'm like, and it's all pagan. I was like, dang it. I was like, we can't. There's so much pagan around it. I can't. And so that was our last Christmas of December 2020, and ever since then it's been nothing but feast. And it was ironic though, because I swear kids are more resilient than adults are, because when we told our kids that we weren't doing Christmas or Easter or anything like that anymore, and the reasons why, and I basically told my kids, because they were so young at the time, I think they were like 3 to 8 years old when we told our daughters we weren't doing it anymore. My oldest daughter, the one who's asking me all the really deep questions after her cousin died, she looks at me and she's like, so none of it's in the Bible. Like Christmas isn't in the Bible, Easter's not in the Bible. She's like, it's other, like, it's Passover instead of Easter, and this, that, and the other thing. And so she was like kind of clarifying what I'd said. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, none of it's in the Bible. She's like, then why did we do it? My 8-year-old asked me, then why did we do it? I was like, because it's what we are told we're supposed to do. I don't know. And she's like, well, if it's not in the Bible, then we don't need to be doing it. And her middle sister, who was 5 at the time, was like, yeah, like she's just following after big sister. And then my youngest one, she was too young to even know or care. She doesn't even remember ever doing Easter or Christmas or anything like that. But my oldest daughter, then it hit her. She's like, so wait a minute. The letters from Santa, the Easter Bunny, all the gifts. She's like, that was always all just you guys? And I go, yeah. She's like, well, thank you. That was very nice of you. She's like, but now we need to do the Bible stuff. I'm like, you're right. My 8-year-old. Yes, you're right. We do need to do the Bible stuff. Yes, she is. Which that daughter, actually, my oldest, is on Kahila with Aubrey's Sweet Creations. And so she has been baking since she was 9. At 9, she opened her bakery, selling to friends and family. She's done weddings, she's done baby showers, she's done all the things. And that's actually one of the miracles that the Father has done this year, outside of all the other really cool things, is my husband and I were able to buy her dream building for her. That's really close to where we live. It's an old historic brick building. It has good bones. Everything needs gutted, though. It's going to take years, but because we're doing it without getting loans. We're just paying for it as we can go. But my daughter, when she started her bakery, she saw this building and she said to me, she's like, Mom, that would make a really great bakery. And I told her, yes, sweetie, you're right. It would. She's 9, mind you. And I'm like, we're not getting into this right now. You're 9. You'll probably change your mind 10 times this year alone on what you want to be when you grow up. But she hasn't. And so this year when she turned 11, in the beginning of this year, I said to her, because she was turning 11, I said to her, you need to do a vision board. You said you're really serious about this? All right, let's get serious. Let's do a vision board. I want you to have goals on when you want to open, what kind of building you want, what you want it to look on the inside, all this stuff, right? And so we did like the old school vision board on like the science boards that you get at Walmart kind of deal, because that's just how we do things. We're old school. And we printed up pictures off of Google, and one of the pictures is this really pretty historic building. It's just a historic building, period. Later on this year, she mentioned it again. After she'd done her vision board, she mentioned it to me again. I was like, you know what? That building's been sitting empty since we moved here. Let's just, for fun, let's just go and see. Let's figure out who owns it and see if they want to sell it. I didn't think we were buying anything. Like, we have never been made of money, my husband and I, because of the choices to have a parent at home and everything else. Like, we've been on so many government programs over the years because of, quote, living in poverty, and sometimes, yes, outright, like not making enough food to have groceries on the table kind of deal. So we have food stamps and stuff like that. But we've always been provided for, just never, quote, like, I guess you could say, of means. And this year, a lot of things have changed. Over the last 2 years, a lot of things have changed. And my husband and I this year have, by the grace of God, been able to get into a better place financially than we've ever been, regardless of what's been going on in the world. And we talked to the guy. I called the guy. I had to go to the water department to figure out who owned the building, because there's no address. There's no like county record of it, because it's like 100-plus-year-old building. And so I finally figured it out, found the guy on Facebook, gave him a call. He thought I was lying about wanting to buy the building because so many people had said it over the years, but no one had ever bought it. I think 3 months after we talked, we're signing the contract to buy this building. And for super duper cheap, because he just wants to get rid of it. And it's my daughter's bakery. And like, I kid you not, I cried so much after that, because I don't come from money from my parents. My husband doesn't come from money. We're all been very working class individuals. I never in my life thought I'd ever be able to invest in anything. And my goal for my 30s was to be able to just buy a house, period. Because in my 20s, I was tired of renting. I wanted to have a home. But we bought a house, sold that house, bought our dream property, and bought our daughter's bakery within 4 years. It is 100% the father. Like, we had friends that during Sukkot, a bunch of our friends helped us gut the building, because like I said, the bones are good. We just got to get everything out, and we got to put a new roof on. We had friends helping us gut the building. We gutted 1,500 square feet, which is only half the size of the building. We gutted 1,500 square feet. I know, it's a huge building. We got it so cheap. In 3.5 hours. And 2 of those friends are general contractors, and they were able to tell us like what we can and can't do with the building. And it's just like, my daughter has goals and dreams that are far bigger than mine ever were at 11 years old. And she is so like strong in the father. And I know, yes, parenting and everything else, but I also know so much that it's just the father in her too. And the first thing after we bought the building, we asked her, what do you want to do now that we bought the building? And she said, I want to anoint it. So she and her father and myself and her siblings, we went to the building, and I have pictures of my husband and her anointing her building and praying over it and everything else. And my husband in the prayer said, Father, we know we're not good enough for myself and my husband are not good enough for this bakery. We know that this bakery is in our possession because of our daughter, and that you find her worthy of this, and we're not worthy of it, but thank you for finding our daughter worthy of it, because she is, and we know she is. And thank you for seeing her goals and her dreams and recognizing them and allowing her to live them out. And there's all the things, like I'm doing in my life and everything else, but honestly, the greatest joy I find right now is seeing my daughter and the father, all my children have these really cool goals and just super cool personalities. but seeing the Father working through them, and now with my oldest daughter. And it's really cool because now that we have this space, there's the old historic building side of it, and then there's like this shed thing that they built onto it that's also 1,500 square feet. It used to be a building, but now it's not there anymore, that we're just going to knock down, but it's got a really good cement floor. My middle daughter now, she's really good with cooking, actually. So her plan is to eventually we'll build another building next to my daughter's bakery, and we'll have Isabel's Great Grilled Cheeses. So my 9-year-old, and she loves making grilled cheese, and all different kinds of grilled cheese, and she's really good at it. But so now my 9-year-old's I'm just gonna buy the bread from Aubrey, and I'm gonna have the bread from my sister because it's just right next door, and I'm gonna have grilled cheeses, and I'll be open for lunch and dinner, but she'll be open for breakfast and lunch. So we just have all of the area to ourselves, and I'm I love it. Thank you, Father. These kids are awesome.
I love it too. That's so cool. Praise Yah. He's blessing you in all these ways. It's so fun, man.
Yeah.
And you're helping all these other people too at the same time. You're helping writers, you're helping illustrators, you're helping children that have been abused.
It's all the Father, in all honesty. There are plenty of times I do get overwhelmed because I have a lot on my plate. But it's really nice because in those times, my husband's very good at reminding me that the Father has called you to these things in different capacities. He's and especially with Debarim Publishing, he's you choose how much you want to work. He's so the Father's called you to do these things. He's do them to the best of your ability, and the Father will take care of the rest. He's don't worry about the future and all the building we have to do with Aubrey's bakery. Don't worry about growing anything or the amount of money that you your fundraising events raise for Kaleb House. He was just do your job and the Father will do the rest of it. He's just keep moving forward one step at a time. And that's when I do get overwhelmed at times because of all the different things going on. I just rely on my husband to keep me firmly grounded and focusing on the Father.
That's beautiful. Well, tell us where people can find all of these things. And also, before I forget, do you have any upcoming fundraisers for Kaleb House? Or
Yes. So there's two of them. There's one at the end of the month. It's the Giving Tuesday silent auction. So if you go on, Kaleb House has a Facebook page. Just type in Kaleb House with a K, and you'll find our Facebook page. And we've already started listing the items that are going to be available in the auction. And so that's coming up at the end of the month. The next big event is the next Refuge Ruckus, which will be March 7th through 9th, 2025, in Fort Smith, Arkansas, at the Fort Smith Convention Center. And it's a 3-day event. First day is guest speakers and getting into the Father's Word and learning about him and everything else, fellowshipping, stuff like that. Second day is Shabbat Bible study. That's when you get into the Word, although you can get into the Word on the first day too. But you do Shabbat Bible study the second day. And then the third day is where we're actually rucking. So we wear weighted rucksacks anywhere, or backpacks, whatever you have, anywhere from 10 to 50 pounds, which represent the weight of children currently being trafficked. So it's kind of like we're carrying the weight of their world. And we do a 5K around downtown Fort Smith to raise awareness of what Kaleb House is doing, and also just general awareness of child trafficking. But we're going to have the ruck. We also have a concert that's going to be on Sunday with actually a country music artist named Brandon Davis, which is all his music has the Father in it and everything else. So that's really cool. So we'll have the concert, the ruck, and just a lot of really good times hanging out with people. And of course, all weekend except for Saturday, we have vendors that are open as well too, and just supporting the community. So those are the two big things coming up with Kaleb House.
Okay. We will link to those. And then tell us the other links that we can put in there.
Okay, so Debarim Publishing is debarimpublishing.com. I also have an Instagram for Debarim Publishing. Kehilla is kehillamarket.com. Also have an Instagram for Kahila as well. And then Kaleb House has a Facebook, Instagram, and our website, kalebhouse.org with a K. And then plug my daughter's business, Aubrey's Sweet Creations, is on Facebook.
Okay, we'll link to everything, Sarah. What do you want to
you.
say anything else to the people out there in this Torah community?
Oh, gosh. The walk is different for everybody. Some people come to it automatically and just dive all in. Some people, like my husband and I, we take years to get there. And we're never perfect. Like every time we do something like a feast or something like that, we realize that, oh, we missed that. Oh, we didn't do that right. But it's a walk and it's beautiful. And see the beauty in both the good and also in the mistakes, because a lot of times it's the mistakes that we learn from the most. And just find joy in it and remember that it's between you and the Father. And as long as you keep moving forward, the Father is there. The Father's there with you regardless, but as long as you keep moving forward, the Father will keep moving forward with you. Just try your best and love Him, and just take time to see all the things He's done for you in your life and the beauty that He has given you throughout everything.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us about your life.